involved with it as a participant.
Correct.
Because originally, when I got the paperwork sent to me, certified letter, and they contacted me, I didn't know what was going on, and so that's why we're where we're at today, so. This way, we're basically just gonna, wipe our hands of it, or not wipe our hands of it, but bow out and not have any say in what happens. So, I think that's sounds like a good way to go, so.
So my proposed motion language would be, I move to have Attorney Calamera substitute as counsel for the township in the Bassett matter and dismiss any interest it has in the previously filed counterclaim and take actions as deemed appropriate by the supervisor to limit the township's involvement in the matter. And if someone wants to.
I'll motion for that.
Okay. I can provide a copy.
Or,
Thank you.
so it's been moved and seconded to, have Kyle take care of this matter for us. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passed.
May I say something a minute? It's
up to the
just,
supervisor.
Our lawyer that we had when we started this, she is now going into FOC. There is a different lawyer. I don't know if you would like me, the paperwork goes into effect next week, so if he needs to contact a lawyer, he may not have the right information. I can email the right information to John, if you would like me to. And that's all I wanna say about it, just to make sure you guys have the right information.
Yep. He will be dealing with the guy that we were dealing with, Mark.
Geyserma or whatever.
Yeah, that funky.
Okay, so then you don't need my
No,
information?
I don't think so.
Okay.
No, I think I can ask him, and I'll talk with previous counsel.
Okay.
Alright, thank you.
Yep.
So. Alright, other new business, reading the bills, checks number 8767 through 8788, in the amount of $111,994.92, which included some road works being done. Like I said, the only road work we have left to do after this will be just the last payment for the chloride treatment, right?
Right,
So,
it's not done yet.
right, so, is there a motion to approve paying the bills?
I have a motion.
It's been moved and seconded to pay the bills in the amount of $111,994.92. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passed. Any items of interest? Moving on to roundtable. Kyle?
Okay, for roundtable, there's two general things. One, we have a special guest here, Mr. Nolan, and we did receive a request, or the township received a request at the end of last week for Mr. Nolan to discuss what he would like to discuss with the board. I believe that the board would like Mr. Nolan to speak around, typically a roundtable we give, or the township gives around 3 minutes for a public comment. The township, I believe, has an indication of giving Mr. Nolan around 10 minutes, and the township doesn't intend to cut Mr. Nolan off, but they would respect that if he could keep his comments to around that time frame to the board. As for members of the public, roundtable is generally going to have the same rules as normal, or at least recently, where we would respectfully request that each person states their name and address, directs their comments to the board. I will have a timer, so you will have 3 minutes to address the board. The board, in its discretion, may or may not answer questions. Just know that if the board is not answering questions, it is one, for the efficiency purposes, because there are a lot of folks here and we want them all to at least speak once. And then two, they do take your concerns very seriously. They are written down, or I'm at least writing them down, and the board can process concerns without sometimes necessarily engaging in a conversation. So with that being said, Supervisor, would you like Mr. Nolan to prepare his presentation?
Sure.
Would you prefer I be in any particular location, or just seated right here works?
That works, yeah.
I think you guys might have heard from me briefly back in March for a Zoom meeting. Just as a quick reminder, I've been involved with this type of issue, dealing with wind turbines for about 10 years now. And I first became involved when I was a concerned citizen, learning about a project in my own backyard and having to research and figure out what's going on with industrial wind turbines and what potential issues they have. And I've been involved in more than 24 municipalities around the state, probably more at this point, I'm not really sure, I haven't kept that close a track. But as I said before, I'm here to try to be a resource for the board and for the planning commission. I'm not here here to try to be combative or anything else. I'm here to try to educate and help you guys avoid some of the pitfalls that have happened to other townships along the way. Just very briefly, generally tonight I want to discuss sound and how you measure sound. But before we touch on that, I do want to follow up on Mr. O'Meara's comments on conflict of interest. And I appreciate that he and I are in agreement on the best.
Josh, can you stand up so you can hear?
Certainly.
Use your outdoor voice.
I can turn
How
it
many
back on.
turbines up here?
Actually, I prefer you leave that on, because I want to use that for an example here in 1 second.
All right.
Then you can turn it off.
We shut this off.
No. 1 second, I want to use that. That is a perfect problem this evening.
Too much noise.
So, like I said, a couple of things I want to touch on conflict of interest. Appreciate that Mr. O'Meara and I are generally in agreement on conflict of interest. I do have one distinguishing factor, though, when you're dealing with wind versus a generally applicable ordinance dealing with agricultural zone or single-family residences. And the distinction is that in those cases, you don't have a board member or planning commission member who has signed a binding lease agreement or easement agreement that contains a further assurances clause. The further assurances clause that's contained in every single lease that I have ever reviewed from every wind company indicates that that member, that person who signed that lease, cannot take any action that would inhibit the development of wind energy within their township. You cannot possibly do your job and consider all of the possible regulations that need to be brought to the forefront if you are legally prohibited from voting for any action or any ordinance or regulation that would inhibit the development of wind energy. That's as clear of a conflict of interest as I can possibly think of. Now moving on into sound. My understanding is that the Planning Commission has discussed a 45 decibel sound limit at the property line. I think that's a very good start. I think you can improve upon that. I think what we have seen around the state and frankly around the world is that most of the complaints fall at night when people are trying to sleep. That's why the World Health Organization recommends a lower limit at night, and there are multiple townships around the state that have adopted a 45-day, 40-night, anywhere from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., something like that, so that you give people a little more relief from that noise at night. It's a reasonable approach that takes care of one of the biggest problems, and that's in line with NextEra Wind Energy. They're the largest developer in the United States. If you look at NextEra Canada, their recommendation is 40 dBA. Now the one thing that I haven't heard yet from your township is a measurement of DBC. That's low frequency noise. And if we can all just be quiet for 1 second. Hear that? Whoa, 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 whoa. Now make those 380 feet long and multiply that sound by 380 feet, by 380 times. Imagine the amount of noise that you're going to hear. That's low frequency noise. That is the source of most of the complaints and frustration by residents who live near wind turbines. You need language in your ordinance to address that very issue, or you leave your residents unprotected. Now, the next thing that I'm going to talk to you about is a small little addition. Your ordinance, to my understanding right now, has language to the effect of shall not exceed. We're all familiar with shall not exceed. Look at a speed limit sign. We all know what that means. But unfortunately, wind companies, in my experience, don't seem to understand what it means. They've taken the approach that a noise limit is not an actual limit or a maximum, but rather an average. Okay? And I can tell you, as I drove the 3 hours up here tonight, if I would have got pulled over doing 90 and told the trooper that, well, I did 50 for a few miles back there, so I'm still good, I'm in the average at 70, he would have laughed at me and wrote me a ticket. You guys have that same situation here occurring, and I would encourage you to make sure you have an actual L-max. And the way you do that is you add just a few letters to that sound limit. It should be 45 dBA L-max, that means it's actual maximum. But then you got to give them how frequently you measure it, because if you don't, wind companies will argue with you that, well, that's meant to be an hourly average or a daily average or a weekly average. You need LEQ 1 second. So 45 dBA L-max LEQ 1 second. And when you're looking at the DBC, you typically want to add 10 decibels. So if it's a 45 dBA, you want a 55 dBc to get you in that same protective range, but to make sure you've got some language that addresses that noise that was annoying the crap out of everyone in the back of the room. Now, there's tremendous gamesmanship among wind companies on how they measure sound and what they do, and I've seen it. They'll place microphones next to a busy intersection to try to say, well, we're measuring your ambient sound. That's not a proper measurement of ambient sound. That's an attempt to jack up that number so that they can say, oh, your ambient sound is 50 decibels in the township. 55, 60 shouldn't be a problem at all. Your people won't even notice it. Except everything, if you look out there on the internet, ambient noise in a rural township like this is probably somewhere between 25 and 30 dBA. So, and each 5 decibel increase, and this, I'm not an acoustician, but this is my rough understanding, each 5 decibel increase is essentially a doubling of the sound. So to go from 30 to 35, you've doubled it, 35 to 40, you've doubled it, 40 to 45, you've doubled it. This is exponential increase in the amount of noise that you're going to be exposing your residents to. I've also seen them try to alter their sound meters to skew the data, and you know, the reason you want to address this is because if you've got an hourly average, not a max, you're going to give them the ability to wake up your people 4 or 5 times an hour and have no recourse whatsoever because the wind company is going to say, yeah, but we're within the average. That's not going to help your folks when they're getting woke up 4 or 5 times an hour from wind turbine noise when the gears are grinding or the wind's changing directions and things start to spike. So townships have used various methods to try to address this, and I've given you a handout tonight that's got, I think, 6 or 7 different townships and how they've used the language of their zoning ordinances to try to address this, to try to avoid the gamesmanship. How do you avoid the gamesmanship? You set forth the sound protocol right in your ordinance. You take away the ability of anyone to play games by saying, here's the rules that we're all going to play by. Here's how we're going to measure sound, whether it's a resident trying to measure it, a wind turbine company trying to measure it, or an acoustician that the township may hire. That's how you avoid this, okay? And I'm going to point to Ulmer Township. Ulmer Township has been the subject of federal court litigation. They were successful in their attempts. They beat back a claim by Next Era that tried to argue that their ordinance was exclusionary. The court was very clear with them that it was in fact not exclusionary. But if you look at theirs is rather technical, but they are referring to ANSI standards. And that's how most townships deal with this. They refer to either ANSI standards, IEC standards, or ISO standards. That way there's a clear protocol for how you measure that sound. ANSI S1219 Part 3 is something that I hear quite frequently. And one of the things that I don't know if your township PC has looked at this yet, but most of the ordinances that I've seen require a sound modeling analysis as part of the application, and you need to set forth a protocol for how you measure sound for that background analysis, A, for the ambient, and B, when they do their sound modeling. But then you also need another section that says how they measure sound once the turbines are built, because they're 2 different mechanisms or processes. The next township that we've looked to is Beaver Township. Beaver Township has kind of a combination where they have they've required noise modeling that includes IEC 61400, and they specify parts 11 and 14. Again, I'm not an acoustician. I don't know what ISO or what IEC 61400 contains, and for that reason, I would encourage the township to consult with an acoustician to get someone who has that technical knowledge, that background, so that they can talk to the planning commission members and the board members and explain what exactly those things mean when they're going through there. But as you see, they also refer to ANSI in here, and again, S12.9 Part 3 comes through once again. Denmark Township, I believe that's Tuscola County, could be wrong. A lot of these come from that area because that's where wind started to develop before it started migrating its way west across the state. They've added a requirement that whoever measures sound has to be a full member of the Institute of Noise Control Engineers, INSE. That is a professional group that, I don't want to say licenses acousticians, but gives them their credentials, similar to doctors when they get accredited by whatever agency that may be. And they went through and they've looked at what acoustical instrumentation and measurement protocol, and they've again required various levels of ANSI standards, again including S12.9 Part 3 for measuring environmental sound, and S12.18 for measurement of outdoor sound pressure levels. And then they also refer to IEC 61400 for acoustic noise measurement. I believe that's specific to turbines, but I'm not 100% certain on that. Again, moving on, Ellington Township is again a very detailed and technical sound measurement protocol. The reason for that Is that my time?
Yeah, that was 10 minutes, but I think it's up to the board, I think.
If you want,
Yeah.
I'll wrap this up real quick. So, Ellington Township is another township that got sued by NextEra, wound up in federal court. They successfully defended themselves. Part of what the suit was there was whether or not that wind developer had obtained a vested right, or if the township still had its ability to amend its ordinance. And ultimately, the court determined that in fact they did have the authority to amend their ordinance. And as you can see, they went back in and they have provided a very technical sound measurement protocol so that they can deal with that. I've also given you, and I'll, just for the sake of time, I'll jump forward, Juniata Township, yet another township that was sued by NextEra. They had mixed results, partially successful, partially not. Moore Township has a less technical sound protocol. And then you've got Riga Township, which is where I first got involved with wind energy. And that's before we learned about some of these issues and some of the gamesmanship that the wind industry would play. And they really don't have much in there other than a general reference to ANSI standards. So with that, I'll move on from sound measurement real quick. I just want to touch on the idea of a moratorium. I know it's been discussed. I know that members of the audience have talked about it. I would encourage the township to enact a moratorium. I think the legal ground that you stand on is very firm. You do have a zoning ordinance, but it does not address industrial wind turbines. That does give you the valid basis to press that pause button with the moratorium to say we're not going to process any applications right now for wind turbines while we research this issue and allow our planning commission to do the work that they need to do. And then finally, the last thing I'll leave you with tonight, and this is something that I've shared in numerous other places, including last week in Douglas Township, a little bit of free political advice, so take it for what you paid for it. But in my experience, in the couple of dozen townships that I've been to, if you grant the citizens the protections that they're asking for in their wind turbine ordinance, and it turns out that it's just a vocal minority that's asking for that, and the vast majority of the township really wants this project without those protections, they'll put it up for referendum, and they'll vote it down. And I can't imagine that anyone's gonna be angry with anyone on the board for providing them protections that it turns out the citizens didn't want. In contrast, if you don't listen to the citizens, and you pass an ordinance that doesn't contain the protections that they want, in my experience, it will be put up for referendum. In every single township level referendum, Big Wind has lost. And what I've seen in numerous townships is that anger will then be directed back at the members of the board who didn't provide them the protections that they requested. And when they circulate those referendum petitions for the ordinance, they'll circulate recall petitions. And I don't mean to say that as a threat at all. This is purely a history lesson from what I've seen in more than 24 townships around the state. So take it for what it's worth, but in my experience, the politically expedient thing to do would be to give the people the protections that they want, and then make them reject it if that's what they want to do. Thank you very much, and have a good night.
all right, anybody else for round table? Roger?
Roger Benton, from Proof and Coral. My biggest concern is when I flip the switch and the light doesn't come on. Okay, now we get our biggest energy source is the sun. Okay, we just haven't learned to harness it other than some solar. But we can cover the earth with solar and it wouldn't be 2% of what the world needs. The other source is hydroelectric dams, water. We're taking them all out. They're old, they're inefficient, they're gone. The other source is steam. Every electrical plant that we have is steam driven, but we gotta somehow boil the water to get steam. Right now we're using coal. Okay, and other methods, the only other method would be petroleum, so we don't do that. So now coal is gonna be outlawed, okay? So now consumers and DTE are only two companies that generate electricity in Michigan are going to get off coal and go to gas, natural gas. Now all our gas comes from Texas, so we gotta pipe it up here, okay? Some in Louisiana. So we have to pipe it up here through 4-inch diameter pipes. Every 30 miles is a compressor, a 1,000 horsepower compressor driven by the natural gas. My friend Bill in Traverse City builds them all. He's being asked now to build 2,500 horsepower units because they can't get it up here. It's being used on the way. We're the last of the lake. Now, the other is potentially wind. Now, how do we, the biggest problem with electricity, we can't store it, we don't have batteries. Okay, Elon Musk is getting diarrhea, because when he wants to get all his cars electric, and we get rid of petroleum, where's he gonna get the power? Okay? It's gonna be nuclear, and no one wants a nuclear plant around it, we're closing them down. And we don't know how to take care of it. So, again, we gotta find a way to store. We have the most wonderful storage battery of electricity, it's called Ludington Lagoon. They pump it up there with energy driven by the coal plants during the night, and release it and turn big turbines during the day when the high usage is necessary. Now, wind. It's not dirty, it's free. Now, is it efficient? Well, we're doing the right thing by putting it, for anytime you take energy and turn a corner with it, I'm in the hydraulics business, you lose half of it, okay? But a propeller, jet engines. We now drive the generator straight on. We don't turn corners. Same with any gear drives and so forth, okay? We have a high efficiency motor. Now our government, in their wisdom, are saying we want to now have 2,500 horsepower electric motors pumping the gas up here. Well, at least if there's gas in the line, they steal some, drive the compressor, but if there's no juice, we're doomed. I look at this as a backup, a contingency plan to give us something. They said they will double the output of that lagoon with wind. So, because they can run it twice a day instead of once.
Time's up.
Thank you, I forgot about that. Thank you. Enjoy yourself when the light don't work.
Comments to ourselves, please, when people are speaking. It's not polite to anyone. You don't want somebody to speak when you're speaking. Please don't speak when they're speaking. Lady over here.
Thank you. I will keep it underneath 3 minutes.
Who are you?
Until
Where are you from?
Mr. Nolan pointed out, oh, I'm sorry, I'm North Stack, I live in Pearson Township. We're neighbors. Until Mr. Nolan pointed out that, I didn't even know it was there. And I asked how many minutes, only 10 to 3 minutes.
Quiet, please.
Could she speak up? I can't hear her.
Okay, that's fine. But
I said, until Mr. Nolan pointed out that, I didn't even know it was there. And I would like to ask how many minutes Mr. Nolan went over his 10 minutes that he knew he had.
we didn't keep track of it after the 10 minutes.
Okay, so Mr. Nolan, when the highway noise was being recorded, was the highway noise louder than the turbines, do you think?
There were no turbines in that location.
And who are these people that are getting woke up every 4 to 5 hours? Can we get some documentation on that are getting woke up 10 PM to 6 AM?
I would direct you to a gentleman by the name of Kerry Schindeldecker, who was forced to move from his home and abandon it. And you can find his information online. He was involved in a lawsuit in Mason County that was ultimately settled. And you can also look at Mason
That's
County.
okay, just.
If you ask me a question, ma'am.
Please direct your comments to the board. This is not a public debate. This is a public comment where you're allowed 3 minutes to speak your
I would
piece.
like the information so I can follow.
Okay.
Research.
I'm sure
Where can
somebody
I
can
get
get you
this
some
research
information.
that he spoke up?
Sorry?
Is that a better question? Where can I get this?
Point of
research?
order, let's direct the comments to the township board, everybody direct the comments to the township board. You have your own 3 minutes, I don't think it's productive to get into debate, everybody has different policy views, let's just,
Well, where can I get the
because it
research
won't,
that he's
well,
spoke
I would ask him after the meeting.
Okay.
Speak to him after the meeting.
Thank you.
I'm sure he'll go ahead.
Alright,
Thank you. Anybody else? Scott?
Thanks, John. Brian O'Shea at Apex Clean Energy. I actually wanted to pass out a handout to the board. This is also on the topic of sound, so relevant to what Mr. Nolan was talking about earlier. It is a very important and technical and detailed issue. And Mr. Nolan made several comments that he is not an acoustical expert. I'm not either, which is why I contacted an acoustical expert by the name of Mike Hankard to put together a short presentation for the board on how to handle wind turbine sound, how wind turbine sound is generated, how it's regulated, and how it's measured. And so this is just a fact sheet, a 20-page document that passes for a fact sheet from an acoustical expert. So you'll have to forgive him for not being brief, but it's a very technical topic. There was a lot of misleading statements made about averaging of noise, or what's called the LEQ. Having a sound descriptor is very important. This is an area where I agree with Mr. Nolan. You should not have just not to exceed 45 decibels in your ordinance. You should have some specific kind of descriptor to articulate how that's being measured. And when you look at wind farms that are developed all across the country, and you look at the data from the wind turbine manufacturers, and you look at the, how acousticians look at this info, the way it's measured is using an LEQ, which is a long-term, like equivalent average, and it's not, like a speed limit average. It's not, 50 and 40 and you average it, it's 45. That's not how an LEQ works. An LEQ weights the louder noise much stronger than the quieter noise. So in this packet, there's a couple different graphs of actual wind turbine measurements, and how many decibels would be produced at an L10, an L90, an LEQ, an LMAX, and you can really see the distinction between those different types of sound measurements. So encourage you to look at that because there's a lot that was said about what a sound average is that I found misleading. A 10 decibel difference is a doubling of the perceived loudness of a decibel. That's true. So when we talk about our design goal for the Montcalm Wind Project being 45 decibels, LEQ 1 hour average measured at a non-participating residence, that is half as much sound as the sound standard that you're seeing in a lot of places in Gratiot County. The Pine River Ordinance, which I know was one of the first ones the board looked at, was a 55 decibel limit at a residence. We're proposing something that is half as loud as that. So I think that's important to take into consideration. And again, just on LEQ, I want to highlight, Mr. Nolan threw out a lot of numbers. I'd just like to say again that LEQ is what's used by the relevant acoustical standards, including some of the very ones he mentioned, IEC 61400-11, which is the measurement of wind turbine noise by the manufacturers, done using an LEQ standard. ISO 9613-2, 1996, the prediction of wind turbine noise, again LEQ, and lastly, ANSI S12.9, Part 3, the measurement of wind turbine noise at receptor locations, again, done using an LEQ. So I encourage the board to take a look at this when you have some time, and I'll provide some copies, Roger, for the planning commission as well. Thank you.
Penny Bassett, Maple Valley Township. Wind power is intermittent. You can't have it without natural gas, because if you need natural gas for peaker plants, when the wind isn't blowing. Also, if you want turbines, you're gonna want fracking too. And then I have one question non-related to turbines. It hasn't been brought up in the last couple of months about replacing Dave Kelsey, which in June you said you were gonna table till July. Has there been any more on that?
No.
You said you were.
In discussions I've had with board members, nobody has an issue with Dave, and John was the only one that seemed to really have an issue, so,
So that's off the table now?
yep,
Okay, thank you for letting us know.
yep. In the back?
Anyway, I think this is all about money. Because it's all about money. I think it's all about money. Anyway, it's the company that wants to put the windmills in, they're gonna make a lot of money. The farmers that put them up, they're gonna make a lot of money. The people that live in Maple Valley are gonna lose money because the real estate value is gonna go down.
Thank you.
Cheryl Hauser, True Bench, number 1, we will not be fearful that the light switch isn't gonna work. That's absurd. Our dams are not being taken out. You can't take dams out and drain everybody that has high water above and flood everybody below. That would be insane. So those dams have to stay in. We owe Apex nothing, period. I expect you to do the best for your citizens, for the health and safety, and as Mr. Rowland said, any of you that have a conflict of interest, watch out, because I'll be the first to take you to court. On a happy note, I would like to know if the Boy Scout building was taken down from Troopman yet.
No, not yet.
Has anybody suggested to plant trees, or are you just gonna leave it? That's my question. I'd like to
The
see,
location?
yeah, I'd like to see a tree planted there or something, just to,
Yeah, we can probably do something when that time comes, so,
okay, thank you.
yep. Anybody else for public comment?
Is me?
Yes.
I have Robin Paulson, Maple Valley. I got this thing here on MTA, on, classes that I think that some young people here that are brand new would like to know about. They have a premium pass, they have a plus package, and they have an essential package. Paid for by the township, and if you can, you know, the more people that you have, and we have a lot of brand new people, it's worth the $1,900. With that being said, as of right now, Andy Knapp is in $675 deep out of her own pocket. And I was just wondering if we could reimburse her that money, being that she did ask about MTA online classes and was told that she really didn't need them. She's learned tremendous amount of stuff. I mean, there's things on here such as how to make decisions, township finances, just tons of stuff that I don't think like Ben or Ann or any of the new ones know anything about. It's only $1,900 and you can still have an unlimited amount of people go. And it's right at home. I mean, they don't go nowhere. They're online at your home. So I just think it's a good idea. Number 2, are we going to discuss the moratorium tonight?
Ours expires next month. Was it the 4th?
It expires on September 4th.
So,
And I think the board will address it, but not at this meeting.
I'm Kathy Clark from Untitled Township, and I just have a question for your attorney. You had said something about vested right and how that's where the shovel digs in the dirt before everything's been passed. Does that only apply to board members, or does that apply to the public?
Would you like me to answer?
sure.
So vested right is really something that, it's a true legal doctrine, but I think in this particular scenario, it probably has limited applicability, given that, so what generally you kind of get fights about in vested right is a project was approved, or there was administrative approvals for a project, they started building the project, and then the township changes their mind, they think an administrative approval was in error, or they try to apply new rules, and essentially they tell the person, you have to comply with these new rules. Here we don't have a project, even the project that I think everybody here is talk about has even been applied for, so I don't think it doesn't really apply to me, it doesn't really apply really at all.